Good morning and welcome to the Sustainable Business Network. My name is Wendy Buckley and I'm Client Director over here at Carbon Footprint and also Chairperson of the Sustainable Business Network here in North Hampshire. Looking at the agenda, we are going to be focusing on sealing the deal. This is retrofits to cut carbon and costs. And there's going to be quite some focus today on insulation and other areas of energy reduction that you might see in ESOS and other types of programs. Our speakers today, I'm very pleased to have Alex Hearn of Horde Group, who is going to do the keynote for us today on the key topic. We've also got Carl Holland from Sonardyne, which is a fascinating company, and Carl is going to be taking us through a case study of what his business has done. We'll start our session this morning, though, with the usual legal and market update, and I will quickly take you through that. Just pictorially, there's a lot happening right now, and things we're going to focus on just in here are about sustainable transport, and you can see some things there on the left that we're going to talk about, and those are positive things. Some things are near term and some a little further on. We've got to always bear in mind what's going on stateside, and I actually put one of those images in just this morning, and you'll know what it's all about. We'll get to that in a second. Closer to home, there's been quite a lot going on, not just ESOS related, but around the Brexit and the deal with the EU that's happened recently that does have some implications to some legislation things here in the UK. Let's move on. And first of all, we're going to land the helicopter, as it were, on ESOS, the Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme, and I know a good number of you are involved in that. Phase 3 did end quite some time ago now, and there have been various delays and extensions of the deadlines, which you're all aware of. The thing to bear in mind now is that we have the ESOS update reports that are due in December. There is a template for that the Environment Agency has put out on one of their newsletters. So you can know what that looks like. The actual submission of these things isn't possible just yet. And the so-called MESOS, which is the ESOS portal, will be opening to take those action plans from the middle of June. We'll be watching that closely and keep you updated. Sometimes we've found that the Environment Agency needs a little bit more time because it is obviously a big IT challenge to do what they're doing there with somewhat 10,000-12,000 companies all trying to put in their submissions. So bear that in mind. The other notable thing is with the developments for phase 4. We are in phase 4 now, and originally say, well, there were a couple of things that were going to happen in there, and they are not going to happen any longer. And here's two quite key points there. There was going to be some more closer alignment with SECR, Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting, that I know many of you are in as larger entities. This is now not going to happen. There we go. The other one is that the net zero provision is being held over to phase 5. So originally, you'll remember that was going to be mandated for phase 4. That's not the case any longer. You may still want to put it in there, and it's hard to think otherwise, to be honest, because so much in our supply chains now requires it. Go figure. Let's move on. Lots happening in terms of sustainable transport, which for many of us is the big scope 3 question. And it's good to see Wrightbus getting some funding and rolling out their fabulous new lower carbon buses there. So we are very impressed by that. And looking towards aviation, lots happening, and a new centre up at Glasgow Airport. You can see there our friends at Zero Avia are very active there in developing the hydrogen powertrain there. So I think that's really good for Scope 3 emissions and also good for UK PLC. Big fans of that. closer to today, we've got the rollout of the EU's flight labelling programme. And this, pardon the pun, has flown a little bit under the radar. Now it means that, well, this is being launched from July, but effectively I think it's going to deal with flights from the winter season onwards. So don't expect to see everything there immediately. But I think this is a really positive step. And not only is it disclosure of flight emissions, and this goes down to the granularity of a specific flight, okay? So know what the airlines, what type of assets they've got, they know what the fuel burn is, etc. It will have that level of granularity down to the flight and the routing, and it will have a very prescribed methodology, which probably differentiates it from some other systems you might have seen on travel agents' sites. I know that we see a lot, and the numbers can be very variable and can emit things like radiative forcing or not consistently apply. So that makes that a little tricky. We're very positive about the EU flight labelling because it brings choice for the first time. You'll be able to look things up and make a decision on the basis of, you know, two available flights, which one has the lower emissions. You'll be able to see that for the first time. So that's really good news. We'll go to the other side of the pond now and look what's going on in the States. And yeah, I did need to add to this morning with various things that are going on. Oh boy, right. Trump signed an executive order to stop the SEC Scope 1 and Scope 2 emission reporting. That went recently. However, a number of individual states, and these ones I'd say would be the green states, have already implemented new programs to mandate greenhouse gas reporting themselves. So this is happening in spite of, not because of Donald J. Trump. It's all very, very interesting how this is all panning out. And, you know, within states of New York and California, some very progressive programs continue there. Obviously, over the last 24 hours, we've seen the bromance between Trump and Elon Musk fall to bits, and that's even happening this morning. And it will be interesting to see how that's all going to pan out. And maybe this morning I'm thinking of EV infrastructures and what that might mean. Watch the space. It's always happening there. Going back to the UK, and a number of things here on the back of the Brexit deal, and you can see a couple of images here. We're looking at Keir Starmer and the work there. I'm going to pull out a couple of things today, and the first being the emissions trading programme. I think we're all aware there's a UK ETS and EU ETS, and I think it's a sensible approach there to kind of make those come together a little bit more for the reasons that we can see on screen there. Yes, so the those two programs are going to kind of move together a lot more and make that easier for us to deal with. The other one to bear in mind, and this really was in two stages, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, has changed. It had actually a month or so ago when originally it was going to cover a lot more businesses and have a lot more scope, and that was cut back, you'll remember. So in that version, we were told that 80% of businesses would be exempt from it, but it would still cover 80% of emissions. Nice application of Pareto's rule there. Well done, EU. I think really it was done genuinely to avoid too much bureaucracy, and if it focused on the biggest sources of emission, then perhaps that's a good thing in the initial rollout. What's happened most recently with the deal with the EU is that CBAM is not going to exist with the UK. So that is a simplification. I know that a number of businesses were actually about to start these types of programs to work out what they needed to do, which is really around, you know, if things are made elsewhere for lower emissions, then you need to pay the difference in terms of the cost impact of the emissions that would have been caused. That has now gone. We always, unfortunately, need to talk about fines. I think most of you will know about this one, and this one really is a mother of all fines. We've seen repeated fines within the water industry. We know that the government has a review of the structure of this market. It's clearly quite dysfunctional. And in the face of that, Thames Water were handed out a massive fine of just under £123 million. And it's just staggering, really, just looking at that, related to sewage operations and routine spillages. These weren't exceptional circumstances. And yes, a massive fine for that, not just for what they'd done there, but also for an additional penalty handed out for shareholder payouts, which were not deemed deserved. I think that there is still a question here of where's the money going to be used? And I'd like to see the government actually tell us exactly where the fine is going to be implemented, and hopefully that's going to be for decent environmental programs and to upgrade our water infrastructure. So there we go. There are a number of links in here. As I said, the slide deck will be available on the description, so you can follow those on here. I realise you won't be able to quite check those out right now. We asked, has your business done any retrofits on HVAC or building over the last 3 years? Actually, what we're seeing is a good number of you have, so that's good to see that. We do have, though, a fair percentage that haven't and don't know. So things to think of for our speakers going forward for today's session. We'll deal with that as we go. And then we asked you, so please keep voting, it is anonymous, what type of retrofits have you made? And okay, this is interesting. And yeah, actually, I'm going to ask the speakers and panel. Can you unmute yourself and just see, is there anyone surprised at the mix of those things there? It's quite interesting. We've got speakers. If you want to raise your hand and let me know if you want to speak, I'll just make a comment on this, and then right, Alex, go for it.
Yeah, no, hi, morning everyone. Yeah, as hopefully you'll see in one of our case studies in our presentation that it's not surprising that LED lighting is the most popular, because that is one of the most cost-effective and easy, quick wins to increase your energy efficiency. Interesting. I would have thought maybe air source heat pump might be a bit higher, because that's increasingly popular and gets you quite a good upgrading of your energy systems. But generally, yeah, no, it's a non-surprising spread, and good to see people spending it wisely on LED lighting.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Carl, obviously you've done a lot of this. Can I ask you for a quick comment? Is that a surprise to you, what we're seeing on here from our audience?
It's not a surprise, no. Good to see solar panels uptake. I think payback on solar panels now is really quick, and I know from our own experience, we get some really good generation from our arrays, so that's good to see. And more investment than I was thinking of, actually, from some of the other companies on this survey. So that's a good sign of investment going on.
Yeah, great. Okay, let's move on to the next question. We ask, what energy reporting legislations are you mandated to? I think this kind of is what it is. There's actually there's quite a mix of things here. Some of you are, yeah, we've got quite a number in ESOS. Right, quite a number there with EPCs. I'm sure we're going to hear that from one or two of our speakers actually going forward, and not surprising actually with the ESOS there to see a number of you with the streamlined energy and carbon reporting that is, does correlate quite strongly with ESOS there. Let's move on. Do you feel your business should be doing more retrofitting? Well, there we go. That's a resounding yes. There we go. We'll move on. Okay. Yeah, I think we'll we'll probably have some thoughts on this. Okay, what limits your business from doing more retrofitting? Let's have a look at this. Well, not surprising here, budget, need more CapEx. I think that one's friend is probably the business case around it, and I think we're going to hear more about that as we go through this morning's presentations. And here we go. Right, that's interesting. We have got there landlorded accommodation. So I think we'll make some comments on that as we go through, and certainly if we don't pick it up in the main session, we'll pick it up with the panel session on that, because it is a concern clearly there. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for answering the poll. If you do, please do keep putting your answers in there, because we'll do the final version in the video that goes out. So if your view's not in there, then please keep voting for that. Great. With that in mind, it's now time to welcome Alex for your keynote presentation. If you'd like to grab the screen for me, Alex, that would be.
Morning, everyone. Hope everyone's doing okay. I'm here just this morning. It's good to see the poll results and actually understand a bit more about. Obviously, surprisingly, it's good to see the audience is quite well versed on these matters. So I'm going to start by touching on a quick introduction about who I am and who our business is, and then a quick overview of the retrofit and the current legislation around EPCs and the ROCS protocols, etc. Then onto the retrofit process, and then some technical considerations on the fabric first approach, which is kind of the retrofit saying around how to approach energy efficiency in buildings. Then a couple of quick case studies, and then obviously, as Wendy said, we will leave some room for some Q&A at the end. So just touching on who we are. So I'm Alex Hearn, I'm founder of Horde Group. We are a business of chartered surveyors and project managers, and we essentially help commercial property stakeholders, landlords, tenants, funds, lenders with commercial property matters in terms of technical surveying, project management, contract administration duties. We are a B Corp accredited business ourselves. That was a 18-month journey we recently completed, which is a whole nother topic, but I'm happy to speak to anyone offline about that, because it's a very interesting and insightful journey for us as a business. We're obviously regulated by ROCS as our governing body, and we also are part of the 10,000 Small Businesses Goldman Sachs Business Growth Plan alumni, which was completed last year. Very quickly, we've developed our Horde property lifecycle around four key stages in the property lifecycle, and those are where our services are focused. So from acquiring and planning a property or a lease, developing and constructing, which obviously is where the retrofit piece mostly sits, and refurbing as well, through to occupying and managing. People that have property portfolios and the property managers that need advice around those areas and compliance. And then through to sort of vacating, selling, or reinvesting in other properties. So again, happy to talk to anyone offline about those in a bit more detail. So now just setting the scene. So obviously the built environment and commercial property generally is a huge contributor towards global emissions and carbon emissions. The interesting thing here to pull out is that in the UK, there is around 70% of the non-domestic stock, so commercial stock, was constructed before 2000, when sort of there was no real sustainability measures, or sustainability really wasn't thought about that much back then. Building regulations were that was the year the building regulations were kind of really formalised in their current version, and it was a very basic energy efficiency requirements. But obviously now, those buildings that were built before that are still going to be in operation by 2050, which is what the obviously net zero goal is. So there's some serious work and upgrade works required to the building stock. And there's a huge trend in the commercial property sector at the moment around ESG and sustainability and work wellness, and places of work that are rewarding, not only from an experience point of view, but also a sustainability and health point of view. So it's a very topical and relevant piece around that. So onto the EPC stuff. So really the minimum energy efficiency standards, which is known as MEES. Obviously, there's a lot of acronyms in this space, which you're probably going to find throughout this presentation, but they basically outline the EPC regulations, and there is a little bit of movement here at the moment. The energy efficiency standards, which were launched under the previous government, have kind of been moved around a few times in the last couple of years, but at the moment it is still believed that the upcoming sort of periods for substantial upgrades are currently since April 2023, all commercial property has to have an EPC rating of E or better since April 2023. From 1st of April 27, that's supposed to get to a minimum rating of a C, and then on 2030, the minimum rating of a B. The current EPC process and regulations are currently being consulted and reviewed by the government, and there is expected to be a sort of overarching amendment to them published next year to realign them in line with building regulations and Part L, which covers thermal efficiency in buildings, and that's meant to realign it with sort of the current needs and the current building regulations in terms of fabric performance, smart readiness, and efficiency and emissions of heating systems. So there is a little bit of movement in the space, but generally it's going to be on the kind of same track which it was on in the previous government, but probably given where Labour are heading over the next few years, it's going to be still remain top priority in terms of what they're expecting from the commercial property sector. There is a point here to mention, and it's interesting on the poll that it was mentioned that the landlords are a restrictor in a way in terms of upgrading properties or retrofitting. And for people that are occupying commercial properties under leases, there is something to watch out for there, that essentially, because these EPC upgrade dates will probably straddle a lot of lease terms, that one is to make sure you're protected as a commercial property tenant, and that you're not responsible at lease end to comply with current regulations, and also to make sure that your operation in the building isn't having an adverse effect on the EPC regulations, because again, when it comes to lease end and dilapidations, you will be required to put it back into a state which is compliant, or which was compliant at the lease start. So that's just something to maybe just be aware of, because we do deal with a lot of tenants which have caught a cold in that space and potentially having to maybe their solicitor or legal counsel, when they set up the lease, didn't cover those. But generally now solicitors are very, very aware of what we call green leases and encapsulating those clauses. So onto retrofit and what actually is retrofit. I mean, in terms of the RICS and wider regulations, so PAS 2038 is the kind of key guidelines around retrofitting in non-domestic buildings, and that defines retrofit as the installation of new systems or equipment, or the modification of existing systems or equipment in an existing building to improve its energy efficiency. They are very, very strong on what is called a fabric first approach in the PAS regulations. RICS have published some retrofit standards, but only for residential property at the moment, but that is being adopted for smaller commercial premises where it is relevant. But for larger commercial premises, there is still PAS 2038 is the kind of guiding North Star, if you like. There is also a concern here that although fabric first approach should be taken, but there should be a risk-based approach as well. So where upgrades are being done that can affect, or there's upgrades should be prioritized that are affecting the occupancy, safety, or health and safety operation of the building, should be prioritized rather than purely energy efficiency. But again, that's all heavily detailed out in the 2038. And this image here kind of shows, is very convoluted, and in all honesty, it's so much simpler in practical purposes. But this image here shows the kind of process that the RICS recommends should be undertaken before you're undertaking a retrofit project. So there seems like there's a lot of key stakeholders there, and a lot of people with different responsibilities: retrofit assessor, retrofit coordinator, retrofit designer, all of these different roles, but ultimately they can be the same person. So essentially what you do need is you probably need an energy assessor doing the assessment and the evaluation at the back end, and then you need a consultant who is well informed in retrofit and has experience and competence in managing costs and procuring these type of works. So yeah, that's essentially the process that the RICS recommend. So in terms of insulation, I mean, obviously this is one of the key sort of when we talk about fabric first approach. If you understand the building envelope, which is kind of the roof, the walls, and the external floor, that is the building envelope. And essentially a large portion of upgrading a building's energy performance after your sort of M&E, like your LED light fittings and your M&E fixtures, it is about upgrading the energy efficiency of those areas, because that's what an EPC assessor or energy assessor will look at. And obviously in buildings of a certain age, they will have minimum or no insulation in. So they're the key areas where heat loss is pretty relevant. When considering insulation upgrades, though, it's not as simple as just sort of installing additional insulation to the outside of the inside of the building. Obviously, with Grenfell and the Building Safety Act, there's been a lot of disruption in the insulation market around insurance and fire safety and inappropriateness of materials. Again, more focused in residential, but still relevant in commercial. And it can have a huge impact on your insurance values of the building if it is incorrectly installed. So there are some key sort of technical areas that need to be considered before thinking about going to insulating or retrofitting insulation. Thermal continuity. So essentially you want to avoid thermal bridges when upgrading insulation. So you need to make sure that it is kind of around especially openings, doors, windows, and external openings, that it needs to be specified and designed correctly. So you're not installing a system which is still going to let air seepage in through those areas. Moisture control is a key one, where we've seen the rise of the Great British insulation scheme, especially in residential property and social housing. There's been a lot of grant funding around and for consumers to retrofit and upgrade their home. This has led the RICS to launch a specific paper on the dangers and really awareness of spray foam insulation, which some of you may have heard of, which is causing quite a lot of issues in terms of the lender market and mortgage insurance impacts in residential homes. And there's a big narrative around open cell sprayed foam against closed cell sprayed foam, and they're different areas of application, because obviously closed cell it doesn't allow any airflow in at all, and can provide pretty damning interstitial condensation. So essentially, where people are spraying spray foam on the underside of their roofs or the underside of their timber floors, it can trap moisture in the construction and lead to premature decay. So there's a big concern around that space. So again, that comes back to choosing the appropriate materials in terms of what the insulation material should be. Should it be spray foam? Should it be mineral wool or PIR, which is your rigid insulation board? And this diagram on the bottom here kind of shows the kind of different areas which people generally go for, or different areas where retrofitting insulation can apply. So obviously, if it's a traditionally built property, commercial property with a brick facade or a block and brick facade, if there's minimal cavity insulation in the cavity, obviously that can be upgraded or sprayed into the cavity. Also, internally, you can obviously board the internal line of your walling. That does have impacts upon obviously your NIA, your net internal area. It will take off a couple of 100 mil internally. So there's obviously a lot of M&E coordination works around the element as well, of moving plug sockets and chasing in M&E into the walls. And then obviously there's also frame solutions internally, which take up even more space, but do provide still a breathable area in the construction. So there's various different sort of methods to moving into the retrofitting of insulation, and it really just depends on the age and style of your building about what method to take. So just sort of finishing off or rounding off with a couple of case studies. I mean, this is an example of a project we've recently completed at the start of this, well, end of last year, start of this year. So this is an industrial site we manage for a client in Basingstoke. And what we've been doing is we've been installing new roofs to the units, as you can see in the blown up image on the top right. So these essentially 2,000 to 4,000 square foot industrial units occupied by tenants on fully repairing and insuring leases. We've been undertaking this on behalf of the landlord to remove the asbestos built up system roof and replace with a composite insulated panel. So it's essentially a steel cladding panel sandwiched by about 300 mil, 200, 300 mil of insulation in the middle. And that's kind of, there's a few reasons for this. Obviously, one, energy efficiency. These units are going from D's to B's with this upgrade undertaken, but also to get rid of a deleterious material, which is asbestos, and make it generally a safer environment for the occupants. So that's quite common in industrial property at the moment. These units were originally built back in sort of 1920, so they're really old traditional construction. But obviously now with cladding on the outside of the facades and also the roof, it almost looks like a kind of a brand new unit as well. And finally, we also have worked with various councils and larger property owners, Bournemouth Airport and Eastleigh Council. This one is Eastleigh Council, for example, where about 18 months ago now, we undertook kind of a energy efficiency upgrade works package for the council to review a handful of their units, 21 of their industrial units around their borough, to upgrade them to make them compliant when the regulations first came in 2023. So take those up for EPC of G or non-compliance up to an E plus. And our process here was we worked closely with a EPC energy assessor to undertake the initial EPC reports, get them to provide their recommendation reports, and then we digested that and provided a kind of analysis of recommendations, including some payback periods and some budget costs to undertake those works. And kind of in line, if you can see the table on the left underneath the text, in line with kind of what was being shown in the poll at the start, obviously the most cost effective in terms of payback is the replacement of LED lightings. That kind of gets you up quite quickly. If you're still using older halogen or older lighting, that's always the quick win on a payback period. But then obviously installing new glazing units from single to double or even triple, and then internally insulating walls, which again, although I mentioned generally if it's a traditionally built property, you're going to be losing internal space. If it's an industrial property, sometimes you can take off the lining panel and install it within the construction if it's a cladding or a built-up system. So that was suggested and undertaken as part of this works. And then in the longer term sort of payback period, the sort of chunkier works were further insulation works, replacement of the windows, and installing sort of air source heat pumps, and even we did consider renewables, but it wasn't undertaken on this project. So that kind of gives a whistle-stop tour very, very quickly of kind of a few examples of projects we worked on, an overview of insulation. As I said, it's very, very varying depending on the nature of the property, but I would recommend that before any insulation or upgrade works are undertaken, that the proper investigations are undertaken to make sure you're not going to detrimentally impact the building.
Thank you so much, Alex. That's wonderful. And I learnt so much that I'm taking away here. I wrote down an underlined fabric first for sure. Thank you. We do have some questions, and I think we'll take these here. Liz has asked about the MEES regulation and how this applies for a situation where the public sector owns the building and it is tenanted out. So that's the first part of the question. Can you please spread some light on that?
So essentially, the MEES regulations always apply to the landlord. So the landlord has to comply with the MEES regulations. They have to make sure that it has a valid EPC and it meets the minimum rating if it's going to be tenanted. like I said, if there is if the building is leased and it was leased and the lease commenced before the 2023 date, if you take that for example, and it doesn't make any reference to the fact that essentially when you're signing up for a fully repairing and insuring lease, it then becomes the tenant's responsibility to comply with legislation, and the landlord can sometimes pass that down to the tenant. If that is the case, then it becomes the tenant's responsibility to upgrade the building to be compliant with the regulations. If it hasn't been covered, in the lease that remains the landlord's responsibility. So essentially, it is also, I think step one would be check your lease and make sure. Obviously, we'd be happy to review the lease, but check the lease and make sure who is responsible, if it's the landlord or the tenant. And then, if it's the tenant's responsibility, you then have to get consent from the landlord to undertake any works to upgrade the property to meet the regulations. That being said, the landlord usually would probably see the benefit in contributing or being involved in those works, and therefore, if it's approached in the correct way, you're adding value to the property, which the landlord's going to benefit from at lease end. So it would be a conversation to be had around them contributing or even funding the full amount of the works. But again, it's a very case by case scenario.
Okay. And there's a second part of the question, I think, relates to how's the interplay between MEES and buildings that have EPCs and decks already? How does that all fit together?
So MEES is the regulations around EPCs. So if buildings have EPCs which meet the current regulations of E or better, then that's absolutely fine. Obviously, from 2027, it needs to be a C plus. So that EPC will have a recommendations report against it on the register, and it's worth noting those comments in the energy in the EPC to see what the recommendations are to take it up to a C if it's not already by 2027.
Okay, great. Actually, one of our panelists, Georgina Whitlock, go for it.
So the reforms to the EPC also is removing exemptions for heritage buildings. So that might cause some buildings to now come under the requirements to get an EPC, but there are still some exemptions in place for if the improvements are not suitable. The heritage buildings are not required to do those, but there is changes regarding that.
That's fascinating. Perhaps you could drop something into the chat there, Gina. I'm sure there's quite a few people online that would like to read up about that. I think there's another quick question, because we just have enough time for this, from Christopher, who's really asking, I think this is a question about funding, really. We missed the boat for grants and funding for solar panels, which is likely to be anything that we can retrofit. We are in a grade 2 listed building. So looking for sources of grants and financial support, which I know is a topic that a lot of us, if we're client side or consultancy side, we talk about a lot. Alex, do you want to comment on what you know about any sources of funding on support, grants and things that we know of at the moment?
It might be one better for Carl, maybe, but I mean, in terms of the solar, but I mean, there are waves of funding, and I don't know what phase it is at now, but usually it's around May time when the funding is released in waves, and I think it's on phase 4 or phase 5 now of the decarbonisation fund. But I mean, Carl might be able to share some more.
Alex, I think you're right. I think this is quite a key topic for us to pick up. Carl, if you don't mind, also, I think we'll put that to the panel in just a little bit. And thank you to Christopher. That's an excellent question. We'll hold that to the panel. So panel, if you can prep your responses to that would be wonderful. In the interest of time, we'll move on next to our next speaker, and this is Carl Holland from Sonardyne on a case study of your business. Over to you, please, Carl.
Good morning, everyone. And I'm Carl. I'm the HSE manager for Sonardyne. I've been working for them for about 12 and a half years, and I'll just give a brief overview of what Sonardyne is and what we do. We are nestled away. Our head office is nestled away in Blackbush Business Park in Yateley. We design and manufacture subsea acoustic equipment, essentially. So everything that we make works in water. We don't do anything land-based, really. Our sectors that we serve are energy, renewables, ocean sciences, defence these days, carbon capture and storage more recently. We're involved in a few of those projects around the world. It's a privately owned company, been in business now for over 50 years. 80% of our products we export, a bit more there. We operate from 7 regional centres around the world. So we've got, in the UK, we are based in Hampshire, but we've got offices in Aberdeen and in Plymouth, where we've got 3 trial boats where we can trial and develop our subsea acoustic equipment and test them out in Plymouth Sound. We invest a great deal in research and design to keep ahead of the market. And we invest in the future, in our people, technology and infrastructure. As you will see from the following slides, our journey incorporates not just energy, but it's also it's moved big time to sustainability and carbon as well as we go through these slides. You'll see. So our journey really for energy efficiency, at least, started in about 2015 due to ESOS. And we had an energy survey carried out by the Carbon Trust, and we had a report like many other companies did, and we began implementing some of those actions. And along with safety as well, my role is health, safety, environment, energy, and carbon and sustainability. So we were doing things side by side as companies do to comply with all the different requirements from our customers, from regulators, and everyone else. Like most companies, I think a phase change to LED lighting of all of our facilities, and that was worldwide. We've got facilities in Singapore, Houston, and Brazil as well. And so we were doing all of those companies as well. Refurbishment of a transducer department, which had really old and inefficient humidifiers and HVAC. And we replaced all that with state-of-the-art lab equipment, which sort of helped us see a massive drop in consumption in that particular building. Purchasing procedure to include provision for purchase of energy efficient plant and equipment. So if anybody wants to raise a capex or wants to purchase any piece of equipment which might have a significant energy use, then it has to be, they have to follow a procedure to make sure that it's we compare it to other equipment on the market to make sure that we're buying the best efficient, the most efficient that we can afford. I think the biggest thing, one of the biggest things that we've done is install a building management system at our 3 main buildings in Yateley. By the way, our buildings are called Ocean House, Fathom House and Haven House, all to do with water and the oceans, because that's the nature of our business. And that allowed us to centrally control heating and cooling initially across those 3 buildings, and take away people being able to have set their own temperatures, and that saved us a huge amount of kilowatt hours. Also quite painful at times, because if anyone looks after temperatures for offices or anything, everyone's got their own sort of ideal set point, and there was quite a challenge to get consistency across all of our spaces. Old gas boilers in Ocean House we replaced with new. Again, that was a big reduction in kilowatt hours as well. We no longer have them at all now. We've electrified Ocean House and gone with fully air source heat pump on that, but we'll come to that in a bit later. On the other more sustainability side of things, with the cycle to work schemes, and you'll see lines like that and pointers to the other side of things that we do as well. Ocean House as well, the roof was starting to leak, and we took a view that it needed to be replaced. We were planning to put solar panels on the roofs of all 3 buildings as well, so we thought we'll replace the roof before we put the solar panels on. And so in the end, we didn't actually replace it. We put a roof over the top of it, and so we had double the insulation really, and that worked well for us as well. ESOS was becoming a problem for us, and so we thought we had to look at certification for ISO 50001 energy management system, which gives certain exemptions from the requirements of ESOS, and we decided that 50,001 was the way forward for us. So over a period of a year, we implemented 50,001, and we still have 50,001 now. Although now it's a group system. The structure of the company changed, and we're now part of a group, and it's a group-wide, a UK group-wide system now. And that's pointed us in a really good direction to making improvements. And I'm a management system guy through and through. So I do 45,001, 50,001, 14,064, 14,068 carbon stuff, and I swear by a management system any day of the week. So it really does drive us to get better and comply. We had lots of big wide open spaces in our buildings, and we started putting up barriers and compartmentalizing them in certain areas to separate areas. So initially it was Haven House, where we've got a machine shop and the stores. So we've put up barriers so we could better control airflow and temperatures, because the machine shop needed a certain temperature for machining, and the stores didn't need to be that precise. So we put a barrier up, and we're able to lower the temperature in stores. 2019 to 2020, compartmentalization again in another building to separate a test tank area where we test some of our equipment from a main mezzanine to better control airflow and temperature. Again, works well for us. From a safety perspective, we got certified. We changed from 18,001 to 45,001, and the new ISO came in. But then we had on 3 of the buildings, only showing 2 there. The third one is to the south of the one in the middle. But hard to get them all in one shot. Installation of solar arrays, and that finished in actually they went live. They all went live on the 1st of April 2020, at the start of COVID as well, the pandemic. So they continuously and consistently give us 32% of our annual electricity needs for those 3 buildings. So it's been a great investment for us. I think the initial payback was about 7 years, depending on the building, but with the massive increase in energy prices shortly afterwards, I think they've already paid for themselves. So it's been a really good investment for us, and we're looking to see whether we can expand our solar at our Yateley site as well. Looking at solar carports, there's a possibility of that. We've had some quotes for that already, but I'll come to that maybe a bit more later. 2021 to 2022, again, looking at more sustainability things now. So initial commitment to carbon neutrality agreed. It was going to be 2025. And the reason for that is sort of client pressure, as well as we had a new MD in 2020, and he's quite keen on us to be as green as possible. And carbon neutrality in our world where we work with governments. We have government contracts. We work with some of the biggest companies in the world in several sectors, and their expectations of their suppliers are very, very high. And most of them have set their own target for carbon neutrality, and none of them were as challenging as 2025, but we felt we could do it. So our initial commitment was made then, and work began on that. 100% green gas contract takes effect as well. We put solar arrays at our Brazil facility. I mean, why wouldn't you? There's plenty of sunshine in Brazil. Why didn't we do it before? So that supplies probably about 70% of their electricity needs over there. When we started doing other sustainable stuff like EV charging points in Ocean House and Fathom House car parks, and introduced a salary sacrifice scheme as well. We're thinking ahead then of employee commute and benefits to attract employees as well, which is important to us. 2023, first electric pool car delivered. There it is. We now have 2 of those, and we now have two fully electric transit vans as well, which we bought this year. So we're electrifying our fleet as part of our drive for carbon neutrality. We're moving away then from practical things to do now to because we're running out of things to do practically to reduce our sort of infrastructure and our building consumption. But we're looking now from big time at scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, and we've sort of got a complete picture of what we could do. So scope 1 and scope 2 relatively easy, and in scope 3 is where it gets difficult. But methodologies for calculations for all categories of scope 3 have been agreed. And we tried as a bit of an experiment to offset our emissions actually it's for 2022 emissions for business travel and employee commute. And then calculations started to work out carbon footprints for our regional offices in Houston, Singapore, and Brazil. I mean, the UK emissions include Aberdeen and Brazil anyway. Sorry, Aberdeen and Plymouth anyway. And then EV charging points, our Plymouth facility. Eventually, they'll be at all of our facilities. A practical thing to do. We wanted to. We have a mezzanine on one of our buildings, which was being used for storage and expand and being ready for when as the company grows for expansion. And in the last few years, we have been growing at a quite significant rate, and we needed a new production area on the mezzanine. So again, trying to compartmentalize rather than have it in the open and heat or cool all of the open, we decided to put in a new super insulated dedicated production area with its own HVAC in there and or air conditioning system, heating and cooling. And that's been really successful for us as well. It costs very little to keep that area either warm or cool. We're getting into some fancy stuff now. Voltage stabilization equipment in Ocean House and Fathom House to better control supply voltages. There's always been a sort of a history of fluctuating supply to Blackbush Business Park, and we spent about I think it was about 80,000 putting in some equipment to stabilize that. And then installation of solar arrays on our Singapore office as roof as well. And the reason we hadn't done that before was because previously they were in a very small building, which wasn't really suitable. They've moved to a bigger building, and then the Singapore government introduced legislation to say that any tall buildings in Singapore must have solar arrays put on top to contribute to the island's renewable grid. And we also hit 2 million hours for a lot of time. That's a big deal in our world. And more recently, as I said, Ocean House, we had an old Versatemp system in half of the building, which had been since the late 90s when the building was built. It was coming to the end of its life, and that used the gas boilers for heating purposes, and it would circulate hot water around the building. We decided to, because it was at the end of its life, we were going to take it all out and replace it with air source heat pumps, and that saved us about 230,000 kilowatt hours a year or something like that. It was a good justification. The carbon neutrality stuff had been moving on as well, and we were at the point where we were going to go for external verification of our carbon neutrality a year early. well, nearly 2 years early. So we implemented ISO 14068, which is verification of carbon neutrality. So as part of that, you have to agree a carbon neutral pathway to residual carbon only. So that's sort of the carbon where it's really difficult to mitigate. And we offset our 2023 carbon footprint in full, which was about 11,500 tons in total by buying carbon credits, unfortunately. But they were fully verified and certified carbon credits, and we put a lot of due diligence into that. And we sought external verification and got that as well. So we were really pleased to be able to tell our customers that we were independently and externally verified as carbon neutral. We set up a Sonardyne green team to drive sustainability focus, and we, as I said before, we're running out of things to do to our buildings to become more efficient. So we are hoping that they can drive us a bit on that and come up with some more ideas. And at the end of the year, we hadn't had an energy survey of any of our buildings since 2015. So we thought we'll do another comprehensive energy survey, but this time we included our facilities in Aberdeen as well. And we're currently working through that report. Though, to be fair, hardly anything was identified to help us become more efficient or show us some reductions. This year, we're right up to date now, so install power factor correction equipment on our main sites in Yateley, and strangely enough, the installation of the solar, our power factor correction gives us a bit of a problem when in the summer when the solar's generating at its peak. For some reason, and I don't know the technical reason why at the moment. We're doing some really in-depth surveys on why that is happening, but it seems to impact our power factor correction. So we're going to do some work on that depending on the results of the electrical survey. Continuing to follow the carbon neutral pathway, so we're still looking for other things to do to try and become more efficient, but we're struggling a bit at the moment. And we purchased 2 fully electric transit vans for our fleet, as I mentioned earlier. For our efforts the last year or so, we were awarded this year a King's Award for Sustainable Development, which Sonardyne sets great store by Kings and Queens Awards, and we've won quite a few over the years. We've never won one for sustainable development before, so we're all very pleased about that. And there is actually a reception at Windsor Castle next week where we're going, or 2 people are going to I wouldn't say collect it, but they're going to reception to talk about what we've done and meet the other winners as well. And hot off the press this week, we've got agreement from the board to introduce a Yateley-wide car sharing scheme to try and reduce, well, a number of reasons really, try and reduce our employee commute carbon, and but also because we are growing at a fast rate, and we're in what we call a 5-year plan, I call Framework 2, and at the end of Framework 2, we're going to have possibly another 180 employees, and we just haven't got the car parking space. So we're looking at various options to try and improve that, and one of them is a car sharing scheme, which has, as I said, has got the go ahead. So we're hoping to, that's onboarding on that starting next week, and we're using a company called Mobility Ways to set it up for us. It's a Sonardyne car sharing scheme only. It's not open to the public, but we're hoping it'll give us a good impact on carbon as well. I've put this is more to do with carbon and carbon accounting, and in case anybody's interested in any of this stuff, we do collaboration days with our supply chain, usually on a quarterly basis, and we invite companies from our supply chain in. Most of our carbon is in our supply chain, purchase goods and services. And we've surveyed our companies, and we realised that most of them have no idea about carbon footprinting and how to calculate carbon, or how to even do sustainable procurement or anything like that. So, or how to offset or anything. So we do a few slides for them, and include some links to some resources which may help them. And we offer training courses as well to them to help them on their way. So if anybody's interested in that, I realise it's not really an intrinsic part of what we're trying to get across today in this thing, but it might be useful to some people who are in attendance. Ooh. And that's my slides done. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Carl. Wow. That's an amazing sustainability program, very broad-ranging, and congratulations, doubly so for your King's Award. That is really well deserved. We did have a question in the chat that was around the car share scheme that has been answered already there. I probably will put a side question to that, of whether you or maybe another panel member knows of any other car share schemes that perhaps those of us who haven't kind of got board agreement for it but want to do the right thing, if you know of any other key programs that we can all hook into to make the transport a little bit easier there. So I don't know if anyone knows of those or has recommended those at all to any of their clients or within their business at all. If you do, put your hand up or pop it in the chat. That would be really good. Let me have a look through. I think there's still some questions that actually come from the last one there. I'll just make an observation actually that in terms of getting more information on sustainable procurement and in terms of carbon offsetting, how that works, then we do have Sustainable Business Network videos, which are on our video library, and I'll get Miles to actually tag those two particular videos into the chat for you, so you can check those out. Please do visit the video library, because it's an amazing collection of all these types of events that we've run. So I think there's now more than 20 of those, and they're all sort of about an hour in length and have some excellent content in there. I'm going to grab the screen now from Carl. So thank you once again for fabulous and inspiring work there. We will move on now to our panel sessions. So if I can ask the panelists, please, to pop your videos on, and we will start the session here. I think the first one that we're going to go to here is around, it is around budgeting the things, isn't it, really? Picking that up from earlier, I think it was the budgeting, wasn't it, that we wanted to, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong there, I've written down so many notes now. I'm not sure which way is up. Yeah, let's go there on that one. Who wants to start things off? Because obviously that is quite a key thing, is how do we afford all of this? We're talking here, I think, about business cases, and maybe actually let's land on solar for one moment, with the comments that were made in the chat a bit earlier. If I can go down that route on, it all looks a bit expensive. I think I might go to Dan. Georgina, you've got your hand up. If you could take on business case maybe for solar, or another example there that might be covered by today's topic.
Yeah, with that solar question, if you don't have the capex for the funding, and there's no grants available for you, one option is private companies who are solar funders, where they put out the initial cost for the installation and maintenance for a period of time, probably about 20 years. and with a power purchase agreement, you then receive the energy at a lower rate. And then at the end of the period, you then own the solar panels. So that could be an option if you don't have the money for the initial outlay. I'm not entirely sure how that impacts the EPC. So that would need investigating, but that is an option.
Great. Okay. Can we look at the business case for solar panels? Is quite a changeable thing because of the cost of the panels. Obviously, those price points have been coming down all the while for the panels. At the same time, obviously, the cost of energy has been, very massive changes in that over the last few years. I'm probably going to go to Daniel Hibbins, as I know that you've run calculations quite a lot recently, particularly for your ESOS assessments on how those, just some comments on how the business case for solar, let's take that one first, has been changing recently and what the return on investments are looking like.
I think, yeah, like you say, the cost for obviously the panels themselves is starting to come down, and has sort of been dropping for the last 3 years or so, quite significantly. But also with energy prices going up, you're kind of seeing that sort of, it's kind of going, both of them are going in our favour in a sense, because if the cost is coming down and then obviously the price is going up, there's all the more reason to sort of go into it. I think when I first started looking at this a couple of years ago, we were looking at sort of paybacks of around sort of 8, 9, 10 years, but that's kind of dropped down to, I've seen some that we've sort of worked out as about 5 years, 6 years now, so the payback is coming down as well. So obviously appreciate that there is obviously upfront cost to it, but the sort of the you're getting it back as sooner rather than later now, and panels are also becoming sort of more durable as well, so it's something else to consider. Like I say, there are developments and advancements happening, so whereas previously panels might have sort of lasted 15 years, now they can sort of last 20 to 25 years, so that's something else to sort of bear in mind and consider. Yeah, like I say, it's still definitely beneficial, and if the government does decide to sort of put out more funding rounds, I think there will be a big uptake in it. But yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll. I've had a slightly different question on email, and I'm just going to keep the sender anonymous here, about changes to buildings and landlords and sort of fears that you need to return the building to a particular condition, and that's going to create all kinds of problems. Perhaps Alex, can you comment on some fears here? Are those well founded or not really these days?
I think I touched on it, that essentially, if you are going to do alterations to your building and you're under a lease, whether that's fully repairing, insuring, or internal repairing, you will need can generally need consent from the landlord if it's going to have a material impact on the building, on the fabric, and that would be under a license for alterations, which you would need to get consent for under the lease. That being said, that obviously landlords are becoming more and more aware that they're having to upgrade their buildings, and if the alterations you're going to make are going to be beneficial for the landlord beyond your lease term, and they can retain them at the end of your lease term, and it's going to have a positive impact on the EPC or the energy efficiency, then the landlord usually is very open to contributing or being involved in part of those works, because essentially it's increasing the value of the building and also potentially the rent for future occupiers. So there is definitely worth considering discussions with your landlord to ensure that, one, they consent the works, and two, they might even be able to put some capital into it to help you undertake the works.
I guess there's an argument they should be picking up the whole bill for it. In your experience, does that happen? And if not, what kind of percentage should you be trying to negotiate from them?
How long's a piece of string? It depends very much on the buy-in of the landlord and their motives and their budgets, I suppose, and liquidity. I mean,
Yeah.
Like if taking solar, for example, a lot of the time, if the solar is going to be retained by the landlord, they would contribute a significant amount, so 50-75% upwards, maybe even the whole thing, because essentially they're retaining it as part of the property. But and again, like if we're talking about insulation upgrades, you're actually upgrading the building element, which you can't take with you at the lease end. If you're a tenant or occupier,
Yep.
again, the landlord should be contributing a significant amount towards those works. If it's such things as LED light fittings or the more the smaller or maybe even heating system controls, etc., then there might be a bit more of a contribution from the tenant. But generally, yeah, the landlord should be contributing the majority piece in all of these if they are bought into the sustainability metric, and obviously your relationship with the landlord is good.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Just another question, actually, on email. As a quick run through, quick reminder of the ESOS action plan and what we need to do. I'm looking towards Georgina and also to Daniel on that.
Yep. So the first update is due in December. Hopefully anytime from mid-June you're able to submit those. They do recommend that you submit it closer to December so that any measures you put in place between June and December you can also include within your submission. It's only regarding the measures that have been taken during that 1 year period. Any actions that you put on your original action plan with a estimated completion date which is beyond December 25, you will not need to submit a progress update on those ones.
Right. And am I right in thinking if you haven't done anything so far on your action plan, you still need to submit a response to that effect? If you could just
Yep, you still need to submit a progress update even if you haven't done anything. It'll just be saying we haven't done anything.
Right, and I think the EA is going to be quite harsh on folks that don't put anything in. So just because you haven't done anything, please do go ahead and submit things. Daniel, just looking at you, I mean, with is the ESOS portal, is it easy? Is it, I know that, well, yeah, comments on that. Can anyone do it, or, are you best to kind of lean on someone who does it multiple times?
I think for the main ESOS sort of phase 3 submission, we sort of realised that the portal had been quite greatly expanded from what it had previously been.
Yeah.
But for the action plan and the annual progress updates, the portal is relatively easy. I think for the action plan itself, there's a maximum of 3 pages to fill in. And it was really self-explanatory. I think they kind of took on board the fact that we said that sort of from the main phase 3 submission, there was a lot of questions to answer. Obviously it is a big submission, but yeah, the annual progress updates and the action plan, I don't think I've spent more than 10 minutes doing an action plan submission. Obviously I can't speak about an annual progress update one yet because I haven't seen it, but I can't imagine it to be any more than that. So yeah, it should be nice and
the
simple.
EA have put out that templated version so you can
I believe
before
so,
you go
yes.
in. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, they've also provided a guidance document and frequently asked questions about the progress updates.
Great. Okay, maybe we can pop that into the chat in the last few minutes of this session. We're looking towards Carl here, because you have 50,001. That gives you some. It's not quite exemption, is it, from ESOS? But just for the audience, because I know there are a few folks as well that do also hold 50,001. Do you need to do those action plans in the same way, or because the ISO I think is assessed you have an inspection every year anyway with that, is the action plan not needed for that? If you could comment on that, please.
There is still an action plan that needs to be submitted, but and that's in the case of Sonardyne, that was done earlier this year, within the time frame, I hasten to add, and but it's sort of light touch. 50,001 takes away the hard work of ESOS compliance. It just works for us. I think it's easier for us to comply with 50,001 than it is with ESOS. So and we get certification for it as well, which is there's a commercial benefit for us to do that.
Yeah, I think, and particularly because I think the 50,001 is part of the IMS now, and you can integrate that with a lot of your other ISOs that you also look after. So yeah, in your context, that makes that straightforward. I wouldn't say easy. It's not easy, but it makes it straightforward. Okay, I'm not sure if have we got any more questions in here. I realise we're coming up to being near to time, and there's a couple of other things that we need to talk about. Let's go back to the next screen. You can see there is another QR code. It's not the poll, it's the feedback form. Please do fill it in, because as well as getting some your thoughts on today's session, we want to know what subjects you would like us to do next. We'd also love to hear from you if you would like to give a talk as well. Please do go grab that. Miles will put the feedback form into the chat there as well. Here's a shameless ad for the SBN video library, and as we mentioned just earlier, all range of subjects on there. We've got product footprinting, we've got sustainable procurement, lots of great stuff on there. So go grab that QR code or follow the long link to check those out. This is all on YouTube, and the session that we're doing today will appear there over the next couple of days. Coming to the end of this session, I'd like to say a big thank you to all our presenters for your excellent presentation, and to our panelists. Thank you so much. Also to say thank you to the three councils, being Hart, Basingstoke and Rushmore. Without your support, these sessions can't take place, so thank you so much for that. Final opportunity to fill in the feedback form, and all that remains is to say thank you so much for joining us today. Have a lovely weekend, and we will see you on the next session.